a major university just released a report saying that Hindu classes for kids are indoctrination. According to these academics from Rutgers, if you teach your kids about Hinduism, you're a Hindu nationalist. Listen, my own ancestors endured the brutality of sugarcane plantations to keep Hinduism alive. And today that struggle, that survival, is being labeled as extremism. Here's how we got to this insanity, and more importantly, how we're going to fight back. But to understand this, you need to know my story first. Between 1845 and 1917, over 140,000 Indians were brought to Trinidad as indentured laborers. My ancestors were among them. They worked brutal days in the sugarcane fields, but they kept Hinduism alive. My parents then brought that survival to Canada and built a Hindu community from nothing. I grew up in a Munda environment, and for the last decade or so, I've been teaching kids the same traditions my grandparents fought to preserve. So why is this report from an American university saying that if you're involved in teaching Hinduism, you're an extremist? To answer that, we need to talk about a term that's now become a weapon: Hindutva. Now, there's a funny thing about this word Hindutva. Those who are for it and those who are against it say the same thing. Hindutva is not Hinduism. But if this is the case, why does it seem that every attack in this report is a direct attack on Hinduism? So what does it even mean? Hindutva literally means Hinduness, and if the definition stopped there, we'd probably be okay. However, it was formalized into a political ideology by Vinayak Damodar Savarkar in the 1920s, and this was during British colonial rule, when Indian identity and Hindu culture were under assault. And Savarkar argued that Hindus share three essential things. First, a common nation, a fatherland. This was the land from the Indus Valley to the seas. This was known as the Pitribu. Second, a common heritage. This was the shared lineage that evolved over millennia, and it incorporated diverse communities into one people. Third, a common civilization. This was Sanskriti. It was a shared culture of literature, of heroes, of festivals, of practices, and that connected people across regions. Now, here's what's important to understand. This recognition of a shared Hindu culture, this is an idea that connects Hindus despite our diversity. And it's not inherently wrong. My grandparents or my parents from Trinidad and a Hindu in Kashmir share something. We recognize the same epics, we celebrate similar festivals, and we have common traditions. That unity is very real. But the political element comes with Savarkar's fourth requirement, that India must also be your holy land, your Punya Bhumi. This creates a framework where dharmic traditions like Hinduism and Jainism and Buddhism and Sikhism are seen as indigenous, while religions with holy sites that are abroad are categorized as foreign. So of course this does raise a question. Does this make Hindutva inherently anti-Christian or anti-Muslim? I think that answer lies in understanding what Sanatana Dharma has actually practiced throughout our history. Pluralism is not some ideal in Hindu philosophy. It's been the reality of Hinduism and how it evolved in India. And if we look at history, India has been home to virtually every major religious tradition. Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Sikhism, Jainism, Buddhism, Baha'i. All of these communities found refuge and they flourished in India, often when they faced persecution elsewhere. Jewish communities in India have a very long history, and some sources say up to 2,000 years. And if you compare that with many other regions, the Jewish community did not face large-scale persecution in India. The Zoroastrians fled Islamic conquest in Persia and were welcomed as Parsis in India. Syrian Christians established thriving communities in South India. And this isn't some myth, but it's documented history. Renowned archaeologist K.K. Mohammed, who you may know from his work in documenting the archaeology of the Ram Janmabhoomi temple, he said bluntly, "India is secular only because it is a Hindu majority country. This is the greatness of Hinduism." And perhaps no one embodied this lived pluralism better than the late Ustad Zakir Hussain. He described his childhood in Mumbai. Every day I grew up studying the Quran, singing Christian hymns, and playing Hindu devotional music. India is an interesting concoction of so many different cultures, Christian, Buddhist, Islamic, Hindu, all coexisting and working in a unified way. This was the daily reality, not some exception. So there is something to this idea of a shared Hindu civilization that Savarkar identified. This cultural unity, the Sanskriti, it's very real. But where things get complicated for people like me in the diaspora is the word Hindutva has been turned into something very different, and it's being used to shut people down like myself. In academic and activist circles today, Hindutva has become shorthand for something totally different, a set of accusations. Hindu supremacy, fascism, threats to pluralism, violence against minorities. More importantly, the term has become so loaded and so weaponized that now it's applied to virtually any public expression of Hindu identity. And therein lies the problem. Because the narrative goes like this. If you organize as Hindus, you're Hindutva. If you're proud of your Hindu civilization, you're a nationalist. If you want to preserve the traditions of your ancestors, you must have some sort of sinister political motives. And this is where it gets absurd for people like me in the diaspora. Because if you start a Bal Vihar or a Bal Vikas program to teach kids about Hinduism, you're accused of Hindutva. You want to raise money for your local temple? Hindutva. You want to form a student association? Hindutva. You want to publicly celebrate Diwali? You're accused of spreading Hindu nationalism abroad. The distinction between cultural preservation and political ideology collapses. And you know what the end result? Your average Hindu will distance themselves from everything that is Hindu. Maybe that's what they want. Meanwhile, for people like my parents, for people like myself, those that survive indentureship, there's a genuine urge to want to pass traditions on to their kids because they see value in maintaining our Sanskriti and, more importantly, protecting our traditions. But the thing is that we can't talk about it. We can't acknowledge shared Hindu culture without being labeled as dangerous. And here's the part that nobody wants to discuss, because the reason both sides are stuck in this impossible fight is because the Hindutva movement and its critics are trapped in the same conceptual prison, and understanding this changes everything. It's known as colonial consciousness. So what is this? When the British colonized India, they didn't just take our land and resources. They took our language. And I don't mean Hindi or Tamil or Gujarati. I mean the conceptual language that we use to understand ourselves. The British looked at India through Christian theological frameworks. They saw religion as a belief in God, as a belief in sacred texts, and a belief in organized worship. So they tried to fit Indian traditions into that box. They called it Hinduism, a religion. But Dharma isn't a religion. It's a cosmic order, a way of living, a principle of righteousness that doesn't map onto Christian ideas of faith and salvation. They saw Jati and they called it caste, some hierarchical system of racial purity. But Jati was about occupational communities, of kinship networks, of social organization. So there isn't this one-to-one mapping of European class systems with Indian traditions. And we, the Indians, we internalized these categories, and we started describing ourselves using colonial language. And more importantly, we started seeing our traditions through British eyes. This in a nutshell is colonial consciousness. When you've been colonized so deeply that you can't even think about yourself without using your colonizer's concept, that's when you know you're trapped. Hindu scholar S.N. Balagangadhara calls this being trapped in the grammar of colonial thinking. The way I like to think about it is like being stuck in the Matrix. You think you're seeing reality, but you're actually seeing a programmed version of it. The code was written by the colonizers, and we're still running their software. The funny thing is that the people fighting against colonialism, they're using the same colonial playbook. Hindutva says that it's resisting colonial domination, that it's reclaiming Hindu pride. But here's the paradox. It often ends up thinking like the colonizer. First, they fit into this Western model. Hindutva tries to define Hindu identity as one nation, one culture, one people. But that's not how Bharat ever worked, because that's European-style nationalism, and it was built on uniformity and exclusion. Hinduism, our civilization, was never one block. It was more of a network of philosophies, of temples, of traditions linked by dharma. By copying the Western model, Hindutva shrinks a civilization into a political category. Second, there's something of a mirror. The colonial mirror. The British said Hindus were weak and superstitious. And Hindutva, how do they respond? We are strong, we are united, and we are scientific. But that's still playing by the colonizers' rules. We're measuring ourselves by their yardstick instead of our own. Finally, when Hindutva says purify the nation or defend the faith, it borrows this straight from Christian missionary rhetoric. Dharma doesn't need to be defended through fear, but it renews itself through our self-knowledge and its balance. And this is the trap that we fall into. Hindutva was a movement that was born to resist colonialism, but it ends up repeating that same mindset, louder and prouder, but we're still confined by it. So I do find myself in a bind. My ancestors survived indentureship to pass these traditions down to me, but I can't even teach my own kids about their heritage without being accused of extremism. We're losing from both sides, and the backlash is going to destroy our ability to preserve our culture. So what do? I think there's a way out, but it requires us to refuse this entire game entirely. First, I refuse to accept these binary choices. I reject the idea that I either have to erase my culture or support Hindu nationalism. They're not the same thing. I can preserve my traditions and also oppose supremacy, because Sanatan Dharma has never been about religious supremacy. I can teach my kids Ramayana and stand against violence against any community. Second, we need to assert our own definitions. We know what we're doing. Diaspora Hindus are not agents of the Indian government. So I'm going to stop letting others define who I am. And finally, we do need to build real solidarity. The actual threat to Hindus in the diaspora is not criticism. It's racism and xenophobia. The funny thing, the irony, is that the same people who attack Hindus for teaching Bal Vikas have somehow become comfortable with white nationalists spewing hatred on social media about Hinduism. But the harder part, where the real work is that we need to understand our traditions on our own terms. Not through Christian theology, not through Western political philosophy, and certainly not through colonial categories. So what did Dharma actually mean before the British called it religion? What was Jati really about before they flattened it into caste? These are not academic things, but this is our own recovery. It's us trying to reclaim our ability to understand ourselves. It's a good time to be Hindu because we're coming to this realization. My ancestors survived indentureship, so I know we'll survive this. And if you're in the diaspora and you're feeling the squeeze between this political Hindu nationalism and unfair accusations, you're not alone. We can honor our ancestors and build true pluralism. We can preserve our heritage and fight for justice. So I refuse these false choices. What are you going to do? Let me know in the comments. But remember one thing, being Hindu doesn't make you dangerous, but your silence does. Om Shanti.